So I've been playing guitar on the streets since I was 15. Started out just for kicks, you know? That rush you get when strangers stop and actually listen to your music. But then it became something else entirely. I couldn't stop. It was like breathing. Try holding your breath for too long and see how that works out for you. My daily routine was pretty simple back then. Days with my beat-up guitar case open on the sidewalk. Evenings washing dishes at Tony's Pizza down on Main Street. The grease under my fingernails mixed with calluses from steel strings. That was my life. And at night, man, I'd lie in my crappy studio apartment dreaming about recording studios and my own album cover hanging in record stores. 25 hit me like a freight train, and I still believed everything was about to change. That's when I met Mia. She was this barista at the coffee shop on Rose Avenue. You know the type, always had paint under her nails from her art projects, wore these vintage band tees like they were designer clothes. Every time I'd set up outside their shop, she'd bring me a latte, sometimes with a little heart in the foam. Sometimes she'd just quietly sit on the windowsill next to me. Looking back, I should have known she was too good for a street musician. But when you're 25 and broke and someone actually sees you, you don't ask questions. You just say thank you and pretend like you deserve it. We started talking during her smoke breaks. She'd lean against a brick wall, cigarette dangling from her fingers, asking me about my music like it actually mattered. 2 months later, we're living together in my shoebox apartment. And man, those first few weeks were straight out of a romance movie. Late nights on the fire escape, her fingers running through my hair, while I played acoustic versions of songs I'd written. We'd talk until sunrise about everything and nothing. She'd make me coffee in the morning before her shift, and I'd play her to sleep at night. But here's the thing about dreams. They look different when you're sharing them with someone who's got their feet planted firmly on the ground. Mia worked 40 hours a week serving overpriced coffee to tech bros and college kids. She paid her bills on time, had a savings account, talked about getting health insurance like it was a normal thing people did. Meanwhile, I'm out there every day with my guitar case open, hoping for enough change to buy groceries. Some days were good. Tourists would drop 20s. Locals would stop and chat. Other days, I'd sit there for hours and barely scrape together enough for a sandwich. But I kept telling myself it was temporary. That breakthrough was right around the corner. Mia started getting this look. Whenever I come home excited about a particularly good day, busking. You know that look. The one that says she loves you, but she's tired pretending your dreams make sense. She closed her laptop when I tried to show her recordings I'd made on my phone. These rough demos that sounded like gold to me, but probably just sounded like noise to everyone else. The comments started subtle. She'd mention how her co-worker's boyfriend just got promoted at his marketing job, or how her sister was buying a house with her fiancé who worked in finance. Never directly comparing, just planting these little seeds of doubt. Like, maybe I was the problem. Maybe I was the one being unrealistic. Then came the night that changed everything. I just finished a 3-hour session outside the farmer's market. My fingers were bleeding, my voice was shot, but I'd made $80. Best day I'd had in weeks. I burst through the apartment door ready to celebrate, ready to prove that this whole thing wasn't just some fantasy. But Mia was sitting at our tiny kitchen table with her arms crossed, and she had this expression I'd never seen before. Cold, disappointed, like she'd finally run out of patience with my whole situation. She looked at me standing there with my guitar case and that crumpled pile of 1s and 5s, and I could see exactly what she was thinking. That's when she hit me with it. How long was I going to keep playing pretend? How long was I going to act like some teenager chasing impossible dreams while she carried the weight of our actual life? She didn't yell. Somehow that would have been easier. She just spoke in this flat, matter-of-fact tone that cut deeper than any argument. I stood there holding my guitar case, listening to her tell me I was a grown man who needed to face reality. That music was a nice hobby, but it wasn't going to pay our rent or build a future. She'd been carrying us financially while I chased fantasies that weren't going anywhere. And the worst part? She wasn't wrong about the money. I didn't fight back that night. Couldn't find the words. Instead, I just sat on our couch with my grandfather's old Gibson, this beat-up 1956J 45 that was literally the only valuable thing I owned. It had been his and his father's before that. Three generations of dreamers who probably heard the same speeches from the women they loved. As I sat there running my fingers over those worn frets, I realized something. That guitar had outlasted every relationship, every job, every moment of doubt. It was the one constant in my life, the one thing that never asked me to be different. And maybe that meant something. Maybe it meant I wasn't ready to give up just yet. 3 weeks later, I came home from a gig at the downtown farmers market. My fingers were practically frozen. October in the city hits different when you're sitting outside for hours. I'd made about $40, which wasn't terrible, but my hands were so cold I could barely feel the frets by the end. I climbed the 3 flights to our apartment, guitar case bumping against my leg with each step. The hallway smelled like someone was cooking curry, and Mrs. Chun from Tubi at her TV turned up way too loud again. Normal apartment building stuff. I fumbled with my keys, already thinking about the leftover pizza in our fridge, and maybe watching something mindless on Netflix. But when I opened the door, something fell off immediately. The silence was too complete, you know? Like when you walk into a house and you can just tell nobody's home, except this felt permanent. I flicked on the lights, and that's when it hit me. Half our stuff was gone. Her easel wasn't in the corner anymore. The little succulent plants she kept on the windowsill, gone. Her coffee mug, the one with the chipped handle that she refused to throw away, not in the sink where it usually lived. I walked into the bedroom and opened the closet. My clothes hung there looking lonely, with all these empty hangers where her dresses used to be. The bed was made perfectly, like she'd never slept in it. Military-style corners, which was weird because Mia never made the bed, ever. That was always my thing. On the nightstand, where she usually kept her phone charger, and whatever book she was reading, there was just a folded piece of notebook paper. I sat on the edge of the bed and unfolded it. Her handwriting, the same loops and curves I'd watched her use to write grocery lists and birthday cards. The note was short, just 3 lines that basically said she couldn't keep living in a fantasy. She needed reality, stability, a future that made sense. She was sorry, but she had to go. Here's what's funny about breakups. You always think you'll handle them better than you actually do. I thought I'd be angry or sad or something dramatic. Instead, I just felt empty, like someone had scooped out my insides and left me sitting there trying to figure out what I was supposed to do with all this space. I grabbed my guitar and sat on the living room floor, right where our coffee table used to be. Started playing this melody that had been stuck in my head for weeks. Nothing fancy, just these simple chord progressions that somehow felt like they meant something. I played until my neighbors banged on the wall, then played some more. The next month was basically a blur of instant ramen, and way too much time alone with my thoughts. I kept up my usual spots, the corner by the bookstore, the entrance to the subway station during rush hour. But my heart wasn't really in it. People could tell too. Tips were down, and a few regulars who usually stopped to chat just walked by with these awkward smiles. I started spending more time online, which was probably a mistake. You know how it is. You tell yourself you're just checking social media for 5 minutes, and suddenly it's 3 a.m., and you're watching videos of cats playing piano. I wasn't looking for her, I swear. But somehow, I ended up on her Instagram page anyway. She'd moved to Los Angeles. Of course she had. There were pictures of her at coffee shops that looked way cooler than anything we had back east. Art galleries, beach sunsets, her and some new friends I'd never seen before. She looked happy, really happy. The kind of happy that makes you realize maybe you were holding someone back without even knowing it. But then I saw something that made my stomach drop. She'd posted a video. Her sitting in what looked like a recording studio, laughing with some guy I didn't recognize. The caption said something about being grateful for new opportunities and following your dreams. In the background, I could hear music playing, rock music, and the song was called Real Life. I clicked on the video before I could stop myself. There she was, talking about this new band she joined as their photographer and social media manager. The lead singer, some perfectly styled guy with the kind of jawline that belongs in magazines, had his arm around her shoulders. Very casual, very comfortable, like they'd known each other for years instead of weeks. The worst part wasn't even that she'd moved on so fast. It was hearing her talk about the band's message, about making music that connected with people's real experiences instead of just fantasy. She used that word, fantasy, the same way she'd said it that last night in our apartment, like it was something childish that responsible adults grow out of. I closed the laptop and just sat there for probably an hour. The apartment felt even emptier than before, if that was possible. I kept thinking about that song title, Real Life, and wondering if she'd suggested it, if it was some kind of message aimed at me, or if I was just being paranoid and self-centered. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept picking up my guitar and putting it down again. Every song I tried to play reminded me of something. Late nights when she'd curl up next to me while I worked on new material, or the way she'd hum along when she thought I wasn't listening. Music had always been my escape, but suddenly it felt like a trap. 2 weeks after the whole social media disaster, I was back to my routine, but everything felt different. I'd set up at my usual spot near Venice Beach, this pedestrian crossing where tourists and locals mix together pretty well. Usually it was a good location, but that particular day was rough. The sun was brutal, hitting me right in the eyes no matter how I positioned myself. By noon, I'd made maybe $12. Mostly quarters and pocket change from people who felt bad walking past empty-handed. My throat was getting scratchy from singing, and my fingertips were starting to go numb. I was seriously considering packing up early when this older guy stopped right in front of me. He wasn't your typical tourist. Silver hair, black sunglasses, leather jacket that looked like it had some stories to tell. But what really caught my attention was how he was staring at my guitar, not listening to my playing, not watching me, just focused completely on the instrument itself like he'd seen a ghost. I finished the song I was working through, some Johnny Cash cover that usually got good reactions, and he stepped closer. That's when he said something that completely threw me off. He recognized my guitar, not just the model or the year, but this specific instrument. He knew it belonged to someone named Billy Strand. The world kind of stopped for a second. Nobody had mentioned my grandfather's name in years. He died when I was 12, and most of his old friends were either gone or had lost touch with the family. This guy, Leonard, that's what he called himself, claimed he'd known my grandfather back in the 60s. They'd been best friends, apparently. Leonard sat down on the bench next to my setup without asking, like we were old friends catching up. He started telling me stories about my grandfather that I'd never heard before. How Billy used to play the same guitar at coffee houses and small clubs around Los Angeles. How he'd almost made it big with a record deal that fell through at the last minute because of some industry politics. The crazy part was Leonard knew details that only someone who'd really been there would know, like how my grandfather always tuned his low E string slightly flat because he liked the way it made certain chords ring out, or how he had this habit of tapping the body of the guitar with his thumb during instrumental breaks, something I'd been doing my whole life without realizing where I picked it up. After about 20 minutes of these stories, Leonard pulled out his phone. He asked if I'd play something the way my grandfather would have played it, not a specific song, just whatever felt right in the moment. I was skeptical. This whole thing felt too weird to be real, but something about the guy seemed genuine. So I played. Started with this finger-picking pattern my grandfather had taught me when I was maybe 8 years old, then moved into this blues progression that seemed to flow naturally from there. I wasn't performing for tips anymore. I was just playing music because it felt good, the way it used to when I was a kid, and nobody was keeping score. Leonard recorded maybe 3 minutes of video on his phone. The whole time, he had this expression like he was watching something impossible happen. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something about old souls still making music in the city, and how some things skip generations but never really disappear. Before he left, he gave me his business card, plain white with just his name and phone number. No fancy logos or titles, but the paper felt expensive. He told me to meet him at an address in Hollywood the next morning. Said he had a studio there and wanted to try something. I almost threw the card away. The whole encounter felt like one of those too good to be true situations that usually end with someone trying to sell you something. But when I got home that night, I looked up Leonard's name online. Turns out he was the real deal, a producer who'd worked with some major names back in the 70s and 80s. The next morning, I took the bus to Hollywood with my guitar and a bunch of nervous energy. The address led me to this unassuming building wedged between a Thai restaurant and a dry cleaner. The kind of place you'd walk past 100 times without noticing. But when Leonard let me in, the space opened up into this incredible vintage recording studio. Everything looked like it belonged in a museum. Analog mixing boards, microphones that probably cost more than my car, gold records on the walls from artists I'd grown up listening to. Leonard showed me around like a proud parent, pointing out equipment he'd used on famous recordings. But he kept coming back to the music, asking me to play different things. We spent the whole day just experimenting. He'd suggest a chord progression or a rhythm, and I'd try to interpret through my own style. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. But Leonard seemed more interested in the process than the results. He recorded everything, but casually, like he was just documenting a conversation between friends. Late in the afternoon, he played back some of the recordings. I barely recognized my own voice. The studio setup made everything sound so much fuller and richer than I was used to. But more than that, there was something in the performances that felt different. More honest, maybe. Like I'd finally stopped trying to prove something and just started being myself. That's when Leonard told me his plan. He wanted to post one of the videos online. Something simple and authentic that would let people discover the music organically. No big marketing push, no manufactured hype. Just good music finding its way to people who needed to hear it. The way things used to work before everything became so calculated and artificial. Leonard posted the video on a Tuesday evening with the caption, "Grandson of Billy Strand. Old soul still playing the city." I didn't think much of it at first. Figured maybe his friends would watch it. Maybe I'd get a few dozen views, if I was lucky. Boy, was I wrong about that. I woke up Wednesday morning to 17 missed calls and a bunch of text messages from numbers I didn't recognize. My phone was buzzing constantly with notifications. When I finally checked Leonard's post, the view count made me think there was some kind of glitch. 100,000 views overnight. By lunch, it was at 500,000. The comments section was absolutely insane. People sharing stories about their own grandparents who played music. Others asking where they could hear more of my stuff. Someone had even tracked down old recordings of my grandfather and posted links in the comments. I spent hours reading through everything, completely overwhelmed. Then the media requests started coming in. Local newspapers, music blogs, even a few radio stations wanting interviews. I'd never dealt with anything like this before. My biggest audience had been maybe 30 people gathered around my street corner setup. Now I had strangers across the country sharing my music with their friends. Leonard suggested we strike while the iron was hot. He had all this old equipment in his studio, the kind of analog gear that musicians spend fortunes trying to recreate digitally. We decided to record an EP the old-fashioned way, with minimal overdubs and no auto-tune. Just raw, honest performances that captured the same energy as the viral video. The recording process was incredible. We'd start each day with coffee and just talking about music, what it meant to us, what we wanted to say. Then we'd spend hours experimenting with different arrangements, letting songs evolve naturally instead of forcing them into predetermined shapes. Leonard had this way of drawing out performances that felt more authentic than anything I'd done before. We recorded 5 songs in 2 weeks. Each one told a different piece of my story. The street performing years, the relationship with Mia, the struggle to keep believing in something when everyone around you thinks you're crazy. But we wrapped it all in melodies that felt timeless, like they could have been written in any decade. The EP release was surreal. We put out independently, just uploaded it to streaming platforms and let people find it. Within a week, it was charting on several independent music lists. Music journalists were calling it a throwback to when songwriting mattered more than production tricks. Rolling Stone did a feature about the resurgence of authentic acoustic music. That's when the interview requests really exploded. Late-night talk shows, music podcasts, even a few morning news programs that wanted to do human interest stories about the street musician who became an overnight sensation. I was terrible at interviews initially, way too nervous, kept stumbling over my words. But Leonard coached me through it. The weirdest part was how the success changed my daily routine. I couldn't go back to street performing the same way, because people would recognize me now. Instead, I started getting invited to play at legitimate venues, coffee shops, small theaters, even a few music festivals. The money was better, but more importantly, I was reaching people who were actually there to listen. During this whole whirlwind, I kept thinking about something Leonard had said in the studio. He told me that real success in music isn't about fame or money. It's about creating something that connects with people on a deeper level, something that makes them feel less alone in the world. That's what my grandfather had understood, and that's what I was finally starting to grasp. So I decided to use the platform for something meaningful. I started a Patreon account, but not for myself, for other street musicians who were struggling the way I had been. People could subscribe to support local musicians in their cities, funding everything from instrument repairs to recording sessions for artists who couldn't afford studio time. The response was overwhelming. Within months, we were supporting dozens of musicians across the country. I started getting videos from people who'd received guitars through the program or who'd been able to record their first EP. Because of the funding, it felt like we were building something bigger than just my own career. Then came the music school idea. Leonard had connections with some investors who were interested in supporting music education. We pitched this concept for a different kind of music school, one that focused on authentic expression over technical perfection. Free lessons for kids who showed talent, but didn't have access to traditional music education. The school opened 6 months after the viral video in a converted warehouse space in downtown L.A. We called it the Billy Strand Music Foundation in honor of my grandfather. The curriculum was built around the idea that music should be accessible to everyone, not just people who could afford expensive lessons and instruments. Looking back, it's amazing how quickly everything changed. One day I'm playing for spare change on street corners. The next I'm running a nonprofit and getting invited to speak at music conferences. But the core of what I was doing remained the same. Just try and make music that mattered and helping other people do the same. The whole experience taught me that Mia wasn't entirely wrong about needing to face reality. She was just wrong about what reality looked like. Sometimes the most practical thing you can do is follow your dreams, especially when those dreams include lifting other people up along the way. About 8 months after everything changed, I was sitting in my new apartment, nothing fancy, but it had actual soundproofing and space for 2 guitars, when my phone buzzed with a message from a number I hadn't seen in almost a year. My stomach dropped before I even opened it, because somehow I knew exactly who it was. The message was short and sweet, like Mia always was when she was trying to be diplomatic. She'd seen me on Spotify, watched some of the interviews online, heard about the Music Foundation. She said she was proud of me, that I'd really made it, and that she was happy to see me succeeding. Very mature, very supportive, very distant. I stared at that message for probably 20 minutes, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. Part of me wanted to write back immediately, to tell her about everything that had happened, to share the whole crazy journey from street corners to recording studios. Another part of me was still hurt, still carrying around that feeling of being abandoned when things got tough. But mostly, I felt something I hadn't expected. Complete peace with how everything had played out. If she hadn't left, I never would have met Leonard. I never would have had that conversation with my grandfather's old friend. Never would have learned those stories about the music that ran in my family. Her leaving forced me to figure out who I was without someone else's expectations weighing me down. I started typing a response, then deleted it. Started again, deleted again. Everything I wrote felt either too bitter or too forgiving. Too much like I was trying to prove something, or not enough like I cared at all. Finally, I settled on something simple and honest. Thanks. I'm proud of me, too. Then I did something that surprised even me. I blocked her number. Not out of anger or spite, but because I realized I didn't need that connection anymore. The person who'd left that note on my nightstand was part of a different chapter of my life, a chapter that had led me to where I was now, but wasn't part of where I was going. Later that week, I was at the Music Foundation working with a 16-year-old kid named Marcus who reminded me a lot of myself at that age. He'd been playing guitar for 3 years, mostly teaching himself from YouTube videos, and he had this raw talent that just needed some guidance and encouragement. Marcus was working on a song he'd written about his neighborhood, about friends who dropped out of school, and older brothers who'd gotten caught up in things they couldn't get out of. Real stuff, heavy stuff, but he was channeling it into something beautiful. Watching him play reminded me why I'd started the foundation in the first place. During our session, Marcus asked me about the viral video that had started everything. He wanted to know if I'd ever thought about giving up music before it took off. I told him honestly that I'd come close, especially after Mia left. But I'd learned something important about the difference between quitting and letting go. Quitting means you stop believing in yourself, stop trying, stop growing. Letting go means you release the things that aren't serving you anymore. Toxic relationships, other people's expectations, the need to prove yourself to people who don't understand your vision. I'd spent so much energy trying to convince Mia that my dreams were valid, when I should have been putting that energy into actually pursuing them. These days, I play different venues, but I still perform regularly. The foundation has expanded to 3 cities, and we're working on a 4th. I've got a full album coming out next year, recorded with the same analog approach that made the EP special. Leonard and I are talking about starting a label focused on authentic, unprocessed music. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if Mia had stayed, if she'd been more supportive of the music. Would I have gotten comfortable and stopped pushing myself? Would I have settled for smaller dreams because I was afraid of rocking the boat? It's impossible to know for sure, but I suspect her leaving was exactly what I needed, even though it didn't feel like it at the time. The funny thing is, I don't think about her much anymore. Not in a bitter way. I genuinely hope she's happy with her life in L.A., with her photographer career, and whatever relationship she's building out there. But she's not part of my story anymore, and that feels right. My story now is about the music, about the kids we're teaching, about creating something that matters. It's about proving that you can build a career on authenticity instead of compromise. It's about showing other dreamers that sometimes the most practical thing you can do is believe in the impractical. Last month, I got a package in the mail with no return address. Inside was a vinyl record, an original pressing of an album my grandfather had recorded in 1967 that I'd never heard before. The liner notes mentioned Leonard as a producer, and there was a photo of my grandfather holding the same Gibson I play now. I spent that evening listening to the record and reading the liner notes, learning more about the musical legacy I'd inherited. My grandfather had written songs about chasing dreams, about love that doesn't last, about finding your place in the world. The same themes I've been exploring in my own music. Decades later, that night, I realized something profound. I wasn't just continuing my grandfather's story, I was completing it. He'd planted seeds that took 2 generations to bloom, but the music had never really stopped. It had just been waiting for the right moment, the right circumstances, the right person to let it grow. And sometimes that's exactly how dreams work. They don't follow your timeline or your expectations. They don't care about other people's opinions or your own doubts. They just wait, patient and persistent, until you're ready to let them become real.